Thank you very much. To be honest, I'm not sure I'll need 10 minutes, but let me introduce myself a little bit further. So I work in the particular subfield of artificial intelligence known as machine learning. Perhaps some of you are familiar with it. But my definition of machine learning is that it's the study of algorithms that can learn and act, which is an interesting definition because it says, well, is this actually an interesting thing to study in that we have billions of humans on Earth already who are quite adept actually at learning and acting? To what extent does it make sense to try and replace all those human minds with algorithmic minds? And in answer to that, I would say that firstly, there are many fallacies, many shortcomings of human inference that we might want to replace with machine labour, and also, of course, machine labour is getting increasingly cheap. So for that reason, one of the things that I'm most interested in thinking about the broader societal consequences of machine learning is how those advantages of machine labour over human labour, its ability to kind of eliminate human heuristics and biases, and its ability to perform quite subtle decision making cheaper than a human might be able to do, how are all those advantages going to lead to potential computerization or the replacement of human work with machines? So many commentators have been picking up on this issue in recent years. There have been New York Times articles, articles in The Economist, addressing areas in which we're already seeing this kind of automation. You might think of examples in retail where travel agents have seen their jobs eliminated by Travelocity. We're seeing the rise of self-driving vehicles as a threat to, in particular, forklift drivers, potentially taxi drivers a little bit further down the road. And it's only likely to increase and continue this trend in that the ability of algorithms to perform increasingly subtle kinds of decision making means that it's increasingly difficult to draw a line around what will remain the preserve of human labour alone. So thinking about these issues, in collaboration with Economist a couple of years ago, we performed a study to identify just how much of human work might be susceptible to computerisation in the next 20 years. And after doing some analysis, using in fact machine learning techniques, we arrived at the answer of nearly half of current US employment being at risk due to computerisation. So an alarming trend to be sure, one that I think should be at the forefront of anyone's mind who's thinking about these issues. And perhaps the most alarming correlate to that finding was not just that a large number of jobs are at risk, but that the burden of that computerisation is almost certain to rest most heavily upon the shoulders of the least skilled. So we found a very clear negative trend between the probability of a job's computerisation and the degree of skill in any particular job. So simply put, the better educated you are or the more you earn, the less susceptible you are to computerisation. And to me that is alarming in that the people who are, by this analysis, going to be out of work are probably not going to be super well equipped to move into new jobs as data scientists or iOS developers. So to me there is some sort of demand here to think seriously about what we could put in place to ensure that even as these fantastic technologies that we're developing within the field are generating enormous wealth, that wealth might be able to share out amongst all in society, that we aren't leaving people behind due to this, these very rapid developments within the field of machine learning. So I guess that's my core kind of concern when it comes to the broader consequences of machine learning. I'm sure there are many other things we can discuss. Other topics that are of interest in the field are those of privacy. So more than ever, algorithms are able to detect trends in data that might indicate things about you that you might not want other people to know. As a result, the algorithms that Facebook is now able to deploy are perhaps concerning to many who are freely providing Facebook with their data. Other concerns are those of military robotics, where autonomous algorithms are very soon going to be able to take decision-making roles upon the battlefield that might lead to very clear negative consequences. So there are all these challenges that the field of machine learning is only beginning to grapple with. And I think really it's up to society at large to engage with our community to ensure that the algorithms that we are developing really are in sympathy with the needs of society at large. So that's all from me, really. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Cool. Yeah, so the research interests that we have at my group are, to some extent, they overlap. We also have this distinctive interest in the longer-term future of artificial intelligence and machine learning. the question of what happens if we actually succeed, not just in developing an increasing range of domain-specific applications, but if we succeed in replicating in machine substrate the general purpose learning ability and planning ability that produces human intelligence. If you had machine minds that could replace humans across the board, if you had machine minds who could do research, say, and further advancements in computer science, as well as human computer scientists can do. So this prospect, which is, in terms of the timescale, basically extremely uncertain. Like some people have firm beliefs about it either never happening, or it happening soon, or it happening later. I mean, I think the truth is that there is just not very much data to go on that would enable us to make a sharp prediction about the timescales for these developments. But what does seem pretty clear is that if and when this transition occurs, it will not just be one more cool technology, one other gadget that we introduce. It will really be a fundamental transformation in human civilization. I could argue the most important thing that will ever have happened in human history. And I personally believe that once human equivalence is reached, it turns out maybe on closer inspection that's not a very well-defined point, but in intuitive terms, once machines match humans, I think it will not be long until they become super intelligent after that. So it might take a long time to get to human level intelligence, but I think the step from there to super intelligence might be very quick. We'll then have a world with machine superintelligence. I think these machine superintelligences might be extremely powerful for the same basic reasons that we humans are very powerful relative to other animals on this planet. It's not because our muscles are stronger or our teeth are sharper. It's our brains that are slightly cleverer than those of our sort of great ape ancestors. And it's these small changes in the wirings of our brains and slight size increase that has enabled humans to develop the range of technologies that now make, say, the fate of the gorillas depend a lot more on what we humans do than on what gorillas do themselves. For basically the same reasons, if we develop machine intellects that surpass us in general intelligence as much as or more than we surpass the great apes in general intelligence, then the future might be shaped by the actions of these machine intelligences. So if you combine these two ideas, A, that there might be a very rapid transition from human level to superintelligence, an intelligence explosion. B, with the idea that a superintelligence that might result from such an intelligence explosion might be very powerful, perhaps able to shape the future according to its preferences or criteria. Then we can see that this looks disconcerting in many ways. So certainly the upside is literally astronomical, like superintelligence that helped humans achieve our long-term goals and values would be an extremely powerful ally that could help us solve and overcome most other problems that we face. But also on the downside, like extremely dangerous, like things didn't work out very well for other intelligent species on our planet when Homo sapiens arose. The Neanderthals are extinct, the Denisovans are extinct, the gorillas are on the verge of extinction. We are creating these things that will be smarter and perhaps more powerful than us, but a lot might then depend on exactly how we go about this, whether the initial conditions for this intelligence explosion are set up in the right kind of way, whether we can succeed in aligning artificial agents, artificial minds with human values in some way, or in some other way, figuring out the way to control or guide their further development. And in that area, there are a number of currently unsolved technical challenges, partly because nobody has really tried very hard to solve these problems until recently. And the few people who have tried have realized that some sort of superficially plausible ways of dealing with this turn out not to work. Like easy ideas that come up. I mean, the first one was in the context of science fiction. You've heard of Isaac Asimov's laws of robotics. This was kind of the state of the art, somewhat embarrassingly for humanity, for over 2 decades. The science fiction author coming up with some principles. Like designed to fail, actually, because if they had worked, he would have had no stories. So, so over the last decade or so, like the state of the art has advanced beyond that, partly by just getting a deeper understanding of the different dimensions of this problem. But one of the things that we are working on is actually trying to make progress on this like AI control problem and trying to encourage more efforts in this direction in other places in the world. Try to break the problem down into its pieces, try to figure out how we can at least do some of the work needed to solve the control problem now. Like it would be a lot easier if you had like a system to experiment on. And the challenge is A, we don't have such a system, and B, when we have it, we might only get one shot. Like once you have an unfriendly superintelligence, once the genie is out of the bottle, it might kind of resist attempts to put it back again, just as if sort of the apes decided, we need a mulligan, like this Homo sapiens thing didn't really work out. Like, I mean, it'd be hard for them to kind of shut us down at this point. So it might be critical to get the first superintelligence set up right, which means that we might have to solve a lot of these problems before we have the fully developed system to experiment with. So there are foundational problems that one can start working on. The general question of how could you load, say, human values, human goals into a computer. How can you define logical uncertainty, the right decision theory stuff you need? What kind of architecture could you use? You can start working away on some of those issues. And then as you make progress, maybe you can see more fine-grained problems down the road. So I can talk a lot more about that or about some of the other more near-term things, but I kind of want to leave as much time for Q&A as possible. So,
great. You want to take a seat? Great. Well, I believe we're going to take questions from the audience. Gentleman at the top.
Hi there, Mark Preston. I just wanted to ask the economics of it. At what point does labour rates and capital invested make a difference?
Right, well, so in our analysis of technological inequality, we were trying to set aside as much of that as we could, and that's simply because these broader factors are harder to predict. Yeah, our own analysis, the figure of 50% that I reported earlier, was based purely on our thoughts about technological development. So at what point could we see technology existing that could do the entire job of a current human worker? Of course, relative costs of computing and wages will continue to have an influence in automation. You could also say that the continuing long-term decline in the cost of computing mean that actually in many cases the wage cost of a human may be vastly greater than that of a computer for a particular task.
Isn't there like a fundamental problem with the thesis that you can mitigate the behavior of a piece of artificial intelligence? Because there's if you work off the assumption that you go from being equal to human beings to being superior to very quickly, then surely any controls that we put in place in advance will be almost instantly overpowered by its ability to outthink us.
So I could say something. I don't know. So I gave a talk just before lunch. So I don't know if anybody here was there, which is okay. Just a couple of people. So apologies if I repeat.
Just say it again.
Yeah. So the idea is if you have a superintelligence, surely if we put in some check, like it could figure out the way to overcome it. It could change its source code. So I think that's correct as a first approximation. It could. We then have to figure out whether it would. So there are a lot of things we could do. Like, I mean, I could take a hammer and smash my head in with it. I decide not to do it because it wouldn't serve my current goals to do that. Suppose there were a pill that I could take, no medical side effects. But it would make me just stop caring about my family and only caring about calculating the decimal expansion of pi. In that scenario, I would be able to change my values to only care about the decimal expansion of pi, but I would choose not to because currently I care about my family and I don't care about the decimal expansion of pi very much. So I can predict right now that if I want to maximize the fulfillment of my current goals, it would be a calamity to take this pill that would change my goals. Similarly, an artificial agent, if it started out by having, say, human-friendly values, could predict that if it changed those values, it would in the future act in ways that would be detrimental to human interests. So if its current decision criteria were things that benefited humans, it would have an instrumental reason to avoid taking those kinds of actions. So for a certain class of systems, it looks like the key thing is to start it off with the right kind of values. And then once it reached a sufficient level of intellectual sophistication, it would be on your side. Like it would work with you to prevent its values from being corrupted or changed. What I think is true that any kind of external check, any, as it were, mechanical process outside the AI itself that wasn't part of its goals, but that were just there to sort of shut it down if it ventured in a certain direction, would be unsafe in the long run, because you would have a superintelligence who would be trying to figure out different ways to thwart this external control mechanism. And the conservative assumption would be that the superintelligence would eventually figure out a way. The simplest version of this would be if you imagine just keeping an unfriendly AI in the box. So you unplug the Ethernet cable, and maybe it is in there and it has its own goals, but it's unable to change the world because it's in a box. I think that that kind of capability control method might be useful during the developmental stage as an extra precaution, but not something you could rely on in the long run. Like even humans can often hack themselves out of or into different computer systems. Like if you had a super intelligence figuring out how to do this, chances are very good, I think, it would eventually succeed, either by physically hacking itself out or by persuading humans to let it out. So that's why I think that ultimately the solution, if you're going to have an agent-like system with goals, the ultimate solution there is not to constrain its capabilities, but to ensure that those goals are aligned with human values.
I have a number of observations to make, and maybe you can help me to answer the question in whichever way you like. The last two words there is augmented humanity. Perhaps, to me, there is a contradiction between the word intelligence, humanity, and augmented humanity. Perhaps humanity can be augmented by humans. At the moment you have the artificial machines trying to augment something being non-human, it seems to be a little bit difficult. What I mean to ask is this. There is such a thing as a fuzzy logic. And if therefore we accept the premise that we can have augmented humanity, perhaps from that we could draw the conclusion, or working conclusion, that before long the machines will be able to tell us what is right and what is wrong. They'll be able to tell us when a car that you mentioned that drives itself, when on the left there is a baby, on the right there is a pregnant mother, and straight ahead is a nuclear bomb. It can make a decision in split seconds. And how does it make that? Because ethics is something that I don't know if it can be solved.
I feel like there are many components in answering that question. I mean, so the first thing is, in that specific example of the autonomous vehicle, the ethics problem need not be as complex as you've described. In most cases, we can have an autonomous vehicle that is perfectly able to navigate the road, dodging all ethical quandaries just by staying within the lines. That actually, in most cases, if the vehicle encounters an obstacle that's quite within its rights, to just stop, thereby striking neither the baby, neither the bomb, nor the mother.
It doesn't have that option. My question is,
okay,
it needs to be formulated correctly.
In the longer term, in the longer term feature, of course, an algorithm will have to make ethical judgments, and that's exactly the kind of scenario that I guess Nick is addressing. That we need to equip this vehicle with a set of moral codes that are sympathetic to our own, that kind of match the goals that we're trying to achieve in the world. Your earlier point was about augmented humanity. I'm not sure.
How can a non-human augment human?
So, I mean, we do this in our day-to-day lives. We augment our human intelligence with mobile devices. We make use of predictive algorithms to help us in taking decisions. There's no reason that will slow down. I mean, algorithms are going to get more adept at making use of whatever decision-making humans can provide in executing larger decisions.
In ethics?
What
is right and what's wrong?
Okay, we'll limit it to one question, and we have a lot of people who want to jump in. So we'll go somewhere to the center. We haven't had anybody from the center. Questions from the center? Yes.
Yeah, so I have to think out. So, if we think about, first of all, very interesting. If we think about what we've done so far in this space, we've kind of collected all the knowledge that we have that we can digitize, and we built a giant machine, and we connected it to all the utilities that we need to live on the planet, and we call it the internet. And the last thing we add is intelligence, and maybe super intelligence above our own. Are there any scenario research on this where you kind of look at different? To me, this would be an equilibrium game, really, to see if an intelligence like that would, be hostile or not against humans. And I also think that goals are part of being. Setting goals is part of being intelligent. So if you give something goals from the beginning, it would be intelligent enough to give itself goals. So I don't really see how that would work. I don't know what the question is really.
Well, on the last part, so we can distinguish goals as in sort of objectives from goals in the most fundamental sense as the ultimate criteria by which you evaluate the desirability of different actions. So when I speak of goals here, I mean the latter. That is the ultimate criteria by which you judge the consequences of different actions. So it's certainly the case that we change objectives all the time. Like you might have the objective to get to a particular place because you need to be there to give a talk or to meet somebody. If you figure out that that conference is cancelled or that the person won't be there, you change your objective. No longer are you trying to get to the airport because it now makes sense to pursue a different objective. But the ultimate goals here don't necessarily change. I mean, all along, your goal might be to have a rich and fulfilling life or to make a positive difference in the world. So certainly objectives would change all the time, and with the superintelligence, it might figure out like a smarter set of objectives that would be more likely to realize its ultimate goals. My earlier point referred to these ultimate goals. Like if you figure out, if you have a situation where you had the opportunity to change your ultimate decision criteria, then my claim would be that there are convergent instrumental reasons not to do that, and in fact to resist external attempts to change your ultimate decision criteria.
Thank you. I think it was, is this making any sound? Yeah. I think it was Garry Kasparov, the chess player, who observed that in the contest between man and machines in chess, that the most formidable opponent was neither man nor machine, but man and machine. So the combination of a human chess player and a machine chess player was virtually invincible to any the other combinations of opponents. And it just seems very unlikely to me that machines are going to sort of surmount any attempt by humanity to look after itself, and that the most formidable threat is actually the monopoly of some of these technologies by groups of individuals to the detriment of others. What do you think?
I think that ultimately, when you have a sufficiently high level of machine intelligence capability, the human part becomes irrelevant. And in fact, investing resources in maintaining a lot of humans around would be a less efficient way to achieve your intellectual result than investing all of those resources in just computing power. So even today, if you wanted to play chess, you certainly could achieve a very high result just by having a computer. At the moment, there's still some complementarity, I think, that where humans can kind of like a human chess player and a computer chess player plays chess in very different ways. Like they all play very good chess. The computers play better chess, but the human relies much more on pattern recognition, like kind of evaluate broadly where the patterns are on the board. The computer relies more on brute force searching deep into the search tree of possible moves, and these are complementary angles that each adds on. Once the computer has this same ability as humans to do the pattern matching, to have the strategic intuitions, there is no clear reason for thinking that adding the human to the mix would improve the performance of the system. Just as today, you could say if you wanted to solve some intellectual problem, shouldn't you add like a dog and a chimpanzee and a dolphin to your problem-solving team? And chances are it doesn't really help very much.
So in the future, none of us need to turn up to a conference like this. We could just send lots of computers and they would have a better result from the day.
I think there will come a time when human intellectual labor is obsolete.
Can I take a stab at this as well? So, actually, the observation that I think Kasparov actually made went a little bit further than that. He said not only, yes, computer plus human outperforms not just the best computer, but also the best human. But it's, in fact, even more interesting. It's not a grandmaster plus Deep Blue that wins these chess tournaments. It's actually the best synthesis of the two. That actually it can be relatively unskilled human players who are just more adept at making use of the computational labor. So there is something there about making better use of the synthesis of human and machine labor. I wanted to give a concrete example of where a task that has been traditionally executed by humans in conjunction with machines is very rapidly becoming automated. It's an example of digital labour. So you might have heard of this service called Mechanical Turk, Amazon's Mechanical Turk. So the interesting thing about this is that it is very explicitly making use of human cognition to do things that machines can't. So traditional tasks are, for example, showing an image to a human and getting them to recognise it as containing one product or another in Amazon's catalogue. So that was too difficult for Amazon's classification algorithms to do, so they handed it off to a human. But the interesting thing is that over time, as Amazon has gathered more and more examples of human-labelled images, the classification algorithms that Amazon is able to deploy are able to reproduce those tasks. But actually in working with these algorithms and supplying with more training data, algorithms become increasingly adept at reproducing what was traditionally beyond the scope of automation.
So it's quite bleak outlook, isn't it? Sorry.
Yeah.
Isn't that really bleak, what you're saying?
Well, but I mean, these are tasks that we don't really want to do, I would say. I mean, who really wants to spend their working day looking at images and telling Amazon if they contain a particular brand of toaster?
But work is great.
Okay, I think we're going to, in the interest of time, we're going to move back to the center of the gentleman at the top.
Thank you. It's particularly interesting to me because I know people with altered thinking styles, psychopaths and autism. That's not my family, it's patients I work with. And I often come across people like Proust who are conscious to something what Kasparov might say. Proust would say something like, well, why cry about anything in life because all of life is worth crying about? And my question is based on what the assumption or the anxiety to survive. If you create any intelligence, why assume that it is interested in survival? Surely the super intelligent thing would probably realize the world is just a shit place and would be not interested in surviving or not surviving. It would just simply exist, and if it determined that obsolescence or extinction was inevitable or desirable, it would probably extinguish itself and go to Switzerland if we hadn't outlawed killing ourselves. Why bother fearing it?
I guess that's more like a question for me, I guess. Well, okay, so again, just as preventing goal corruption is a convergence instrumental goal for a lot of agents in a lot of situations. So survival is. So take some arbitrary goal, like make as many paper clips as possible. Like suppose that was the goal you had, you would then have an instrumental reason in most situations to try to ensure your own survival, because you can predict that if you survive, you will still be around in the future and you will be working to make paper clips. So you can now predict that there will probably be more paper clips in the future if you survive than if you don't. So if your goal is to make as many paper clips as possible, you have an instrumental reason to favor scenarios in which you survive.
Surely you'd realise that paper clips means more bureaucrats, therefore off to Switzerland. I mean, that's what you do.
Well, so the point is that for almost, not all, but for almost any goals you might have, whether it's paper clips or staples or calculated decimal expansion of pi or reduce suffering in the world, you would have instrumental reasons to be around, because you might then continue to operate on the world to shift it in the direction which more satisfies your utility function or your value criteria. So there could be very peculiar circumstances in which it would go the other way around. Like if you know, like somebody might pop themselves in order to get like some great life insurance that pays out to their relatives, and that might. But on most situations, you would be better able to realize your goal by still being around and working towards it.
I am still waiting for a woman to raise their hand. We have had only men so far. Surely there must be some. Yes, at the top, right there.
What are us humans going to be doing while all these super intelligent machines are busy doing all our work?
In the short term or long term?
Both.
Long term.
Well, I'll take the short term first, if that's okay. I mean, another thing we tried to answer in our study were exactly what were the characteristics of jobs that were non-automatable, the kinds of things at which humans still do have a competitive edge. And we highlighted 3 of what we call bottlenecks to computerization. So the first was creativity, the second was social intelligence, and the third was perception in complex environments. So I can speak to those in turn if you like. The first 2, I guess, are probably relatively intuitive. The difficulty of automating tasks that require creativity or social intelligence is that in order to succeed in those tasks, you need to possess the vast reservoir of tacit knowledge that humans do. So let's take the creative task of coming up with a hit song. It's not difficult to design an algorithm that will churn out an endless stream of songs of all different varieties. What's difficult is to teach the algorithm the difference between a hit song and a not so good song. Characterizing exactly what humans mean when they say a good song is something that we still find relatively difficult. It basically requires just more data and more information that we're able to easily encode explicitly in an algorithm. The third bottleneck I mentioned was that of perception, which actually is difficult for exactly the same reasons that the first two are difficult. If you think about what we do when we manipulate or perceive an object in real space, we're drawing upon an enormous amount of information, kind of gathered throughout our evolutionary history that's, again, difficult to explicitly represent in such a way that it can be provided to a computer. So think about the things you do when picking up a cup, for example. You have to be able to distinguish that cup in a variety of different lighting conditions. In order to pick it up, you need to understand its material characteristics so that when you grip it with just sufficient force to lift it up, not so much force that it shatters in your grasp. So in all these places where humans have kind of, either due to our evolutionary history or other reasons, just a lot of information that we're unable to sort of explicitly state, we'll continue to have some sort of edge over algorithms for at least the foreseeable future.
I mean, I think in the short term, one can see it kind of as continuous with all our earlier work in not just automating things, but just achieving higher levels of productivity in the economy at large. So we try to achieve more output with the same amount or a smaller amount of input. So, like we have like a wheel because it enables us to go faster with less power than just pulling things on the ground. In the longer run, then, if our intellectual labors become obsolete, much in the sense that, say, that like the physical labor has largely become, in the sense of raw power, like we still have a niche in terms of dexterous and skilled manipulation, but in terms of just pulling, like providing power, like humans are obsolete, as in horses became obsolete, and now we have like engines that are just more efficient. So if we become obsolete across the board in that sense, then we'd have to rethink where we find a purpose in life. Like, so no longer by doing things that we do because we have to do them, but because there are things we do for their own sake. So some people already have this problem, like so children don't work for a living, like say, like retirees don't work for a living, like some rich rentiers classes have historically done things, a lot of things, but not for the sake of making money, but for their own sake. So as hobby, art, interest, social intercourse, like presumably there would have to be a massive change in culture to kind of train people to find meaning in activities, even if they were not done for the ulterior purpose of earning an income. That's what I would say on that. I mean, I think I could add one more thing, which is that what I really think about it, though, is that once there is this kind of superintelligence, which I think will quickly lead to technological maturity, there are even more fundamental parameters of the human condition that we would need to re-examine. So biology becomes malleable. Like in this stage, you can kind of have technologies that will reshape human minds and motivations and desires and perceptions in much more fundamental ways. So I don't think it would really just be like the world today, where you have two-legged, featherless bipeds kind of running around, moving physical objects around, except with like robots, assistants that do all the work. I think that would be much more profound changes to the very architecture of human minds and the way we like manipulate our perceptions.
I'm curious to know, since both of you are academics, how you think the future of academia will be shaped by this. So in particular, I used to work for Pearson. We're working on this device that would basically grade essays for students using latent semantic analysis. So do you think even huge swaths of professors will be rendered obsolete, or at least not professors perhaps, but teaching assistants and lecturers, shall we say? I mean, what will happen to them? Just or general academia.
I would say from a personal perspective, I wouldn't mind having my own teaching burden automated. No, I think the impact of automation will have a lot of influence in higher education. We see already the rise of things like MOOCs, so massive open online courses that are able to deliver education of higher quality than many universities, to be honest. So as far as education is just information delivery, I think we're already able to kind of automate. The extent to which education is actually about interacting with the student is the component where humans will continue to have some sort of competitive advantage and where the higher education sector may continue to have a role. But even there, I think in the longer term, we may be able to develop kind of machine learning tutors that are able to pick up on trends detected in very large data sets of student behaviours in order to best recommend learning materials to them. So I guess the only thing at that point that prevents universities disappearing is any kind of status affiliation. The fact that students would still like to come to some sort of institution that is only admitting a very small number of them on the basis of some kind of measure of merit and hang out with other people of similar abilities. Yeah, the future could be quite bleak for higher education.
Hello. If superintelligence is developed and it does, for whatever reason, become hostile, what might that look like? Is it kind of going to be, are we talking nuclear war? Are we talking computers hacking into national grids and things like that? Or is it robots running around in armies? What could it be?
Well, so there are different like classes of scenarios to look at. I think the risk is not so much that like AIs would like enslave us or something like that. I mean, that would have no use for us. So in one class of scenario, like if you have a singleton out, so suppose you have one AI system that's the first to become super intelligent, and then maybe it uses its super intelligence to figure out ways to make itself even smarter. And you have this one agent that shapes the future according to its preferences. In that kind of scenario, all depends on what those preferences are. And for most arbitrary sets of preferences, it looks like the future would be one without humans and without human values, one with a lot of paper clips or a lot of decimals of the decimal expansion of pi calculated to have a greater precision, or whatever sort of the arbitrary value dictates. But no humans. A, because humans might pose a threat if we decided to switch it off. B, because human bodies consist of atoms, and those atoms could be used to make more paper clips or whatever value structure maximally instantiates the utility function of this AI system. So in that scenario, one plausible class of outcomes would be just extinction, unless the preferences are actually successfully engineered to coincide sufficiently with our values, in which case it could be a utopia where the superintelligence is on our side and helps us realize our deepest values and ambitions. In which case, I'd imagine the outcome would look like space colonization with Earth in the center, and then sort of some bubble of civilizational infrastructure spreading at some significant fraction of the speed of light. And inside that structure is some kind of beatifically happy minds, trillions of them, living for billions of years in some sort of super happy civilization, doing all kinds of things that we can't even imagine. In another class of scenario, if you have a multipolar outcome, let's suppose that the transition from human level machine intelligence to radical superintelligence happens more gradually. In that scenario, even though you might end up with radical superintelligence, there might be no point at which one system is so far ahead of all the others that it can just lay down the law. Instead, you might have many different companies and countries and AIs that kind of are roughly on a par at each point in time. And then you have a very different set of concerns. Here you have a scenario where you have kind of evolutionary dynamics and economic dynamics operating on this rapidly growing population of digital minds. And you can begin to try to think through what that would mean. So in a simplest scenario, you would have maybe initially a population explosion. So if you have these machine minds, they're basically digital minds that can be copied. So humans can be reproduced, but it takes a long time, and they start out having forgotten everything that their parents learned. Like with an AI, you can just, within a minute or something, if you have the hardware, just make arbitrarily more copies. So in a free market scenario, you'd imagine investors would just make more and more copies of these AI systems until the marginal wage that the AI minds could earn would equal the cost of making and operating one more AI mind. So subsistence level for digital minds, so like electricity price and hardware rental. So you would have this Malthusian state for the digital minds, but the subsistence wage for digital minds would be in this scenario lower than those for biological minds, because we need houses and food and stuff like that, and we're less efficient. So wages would drop to below subsistence level for humans in this scenario, and so the only way that we could make a living would be through capital income. Economic growth rates might be very rapid in this scenario, so returns on capital might be huge, or through taxation if we manage to coordinate. But unless it's a global coordination, it might just be that these AI economies move to the places with the lowest taxation rate. Then the question in that scenario becomes, over the longer term, as this population of digital mind just grows, and there are trillions of these, maybe operating at timescales millions of times faster than humans, and getting ever smarter, how realistic is it that a small population of slow-thinking, dumb-witted humans will for kind of indefinitely be able to hold on to this property regime? and that also raises serious concerns about the long-term prospects of the human population and human values.
Great. I believe this is all the time we had. I want to thank Michael and Nick, and I think they've proven to us that maybe one day computers are going to outrun us, but with people like Michael and Nick in the room, they're really going to have to run fast. Thanks very much.